as dinosaurs are the ones to consider totally extinct, bodily and genetically. Now, but why bring vanished creatures back? So this is the question here, which is important. Why are we doing this? It'll be expensive. That's something negative, difficult. It will take decades. It's time consuming, and it won't always succeed. Why even try? Now here, of course, these are negative points, as we said. These, this process is expensive, difficult, time consuming, and it might sometime fail. So why are we doing this? Now here we can say, okay, does the author here have a negative point of view? No, it's positive, but these are, counter arguments. So this is what the author actually expects other people who are against this technology to say. And this is one way to make your argument even stronger. You take those points that are raised by people who don't agree with you, and then you respond to these points so that you can make your argument even stronger. So now here's the answer. Why do we take enormous trouble? Why do we do everything we are doing to protect endangered species? So the same reasons will apply. What are these reasons? As you can see here, we have a colon, so we expect a list of reasons mentioned here. Number one, so we are doing this to preserve biodiversity. Number two, to restore diminished ecosystems. Number three, to advance the science of preventing extinctions. And number four, to undo harm that the humans have caused in the past. You see, so now this is the answer. This is what the author of this passage thinks about reviving extinct species. Furthermore, the prospects, the possible success, because prospect simply means possible. Just a second, this one is not writing very well here. So okay, so here we are saying that prospect means possible. Okay, what's happening? Just a second. Okay, so possible success. Okay, of de-extinction. So that's the name, how they call it, de-extinction, which is the opposite of the extinction. Extinction is profound news. So this is something interesting. This is something deep. That something as irreversible cannot be taken back and final as extinction might be reversed. This is a stunning realization. The imagination soars, and here, of course, soar means to go very high. Just the thought of mammoths and passenger pigeons alive again invokes the awe and wonder, and that drives all conservation at its deepest level. And of course, conservation simply means protecting the environment, protecting the wildlife, and so on. Okay, so this is everything we have in the first passage. We know that the author has a positive point of view. He gives us reasons why we are doing the extinction. And at the end, he says that if we think about it, actually, this is the deepest level of conservation. Okay. So now, of course, we move to passage 2. This time we should read both passages first, because the questions are only about both passages, not like a full passage like we had last time. All right, let's see here now. So remember, even if we have a negative point of view mentioned by one of the authors, it doesn't have to be 100% negative. It's just sometimes, like last time, if you remember, concerns about environment, concerns about something else, talking about the disadvantages of the topic, and so on. Now, the idea of bringing back extinct species holds obvious gee whiz appeal. And last time we talked about gee whiz. We said it's something exciting, something really interesting and trendy. Okay, I'm sorry, there's just something wrong here and I cannot write well. So sometimes I'm trying to write the words, but not all the letters appear in the best way. So, and a respite. Respite simply means break, relaxation, rest from a steady stream of grim news, gloomy. Like we're all the time just hearing, you know, bad news, but this kind of news is a break of that, and it's something good. But immediately, guys, always focus on words of shifts. What do we have after that? We have yet. So of course, now we're gonna start with the negative part. With limited intellectual bandwidth and financial resources to go around, de-extinction, what is the first thing mentioned here? Threatens to divert attention from modern biodiversity crisis. So here now we understand that the author thinks that the modern biodiversity crisis is more important. And when we are doing de-extinction, we are just changing the direction of our attention from something very important, which is this crisis he mentions here. So maybe he's not totally against de-extinction, but he thinks that modern biodiversity crisis, which is, you know, protecting the endangered animals, is more important. Now, the author, of course, will just go and support his main idea. So the first thing he uses here, if you notice, is that he mentioned a report from 2012 from the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Some 20,000 species are currently in grave danger of going extinct. So as you can see, this is what he is saying that we should pay more attention to. Species today are vanishing in such great numbers that the trend has been called a sixth mass extinction, an event on par with such die-offs as the one that befell the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. So basically, all of these 4 lines are telling us what's happening now is just the same as what was happening to the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. This is just to show how, you know, serious this problem is. A program to restore extinct species. Again, look, so the first time we said de-extinction, it diverts the attention from something very important. Number 2, when he says this program, he mentions the program again, what does he say? Poses a risk. So threatens and poses a risk. These are synonyms of selling the public on a false promise. So this time, what is the risk that we have? He's telling us that this program is just a false promise that technology alone can solve our ongoing environmental problems. So as you can see, the technology was mentioned in a very specific, very positive way in the first passage. He said, thanks to new developments in genetic technology. But here, no, it's mentioned as a false promise. You see how these two authors are debating. So what is that false promise? He's telling us that this is an assurance. They try to assure us with technology that if a species goes away, we can snap our fingers and bring it back. And of course, he thinks that this is something kind of impossible. And that's why it's a false promise. We don't have to go on with the other paragraphs. Now we are 100% sure that yes, the point of view of the author of passage 2 is kind of negative, and we know the reasons why. Number 1, he thinks that there's something more important that we should pay attention to, which is the endangered animals. And number 2 is the idea that technology is just a false promise. It doesn't really solve our environmental problems. That's the summary of the relationship between the 2 passages. Any question before we start with the questions? All right, so now we go to the first question, which is a general question asking us about the relationship between the 2 passages, right? Now, the first answer that you should eliminate is C, okay? Because here C is telling us that it expands on the results of a research study mentioned in passage 1, and that would mean that the 2 passages agree, but we know that they don't, right? When you expand, when you just elaborate, give more details on the results, you know, that kind of means, you know, that the both passages agree, and we know that they don't. So C is wrong. The second one, A, passage to attacks. We can take that word, but look, a political decision. Here we have nothing about politics. Okay, so A is also clearly wrong. Now we just have B and D. And remember, all the time, guys, you must or you should be able to eliminate at least 2 answers. And then when we now compare between B and D, we're going to find the right answer. So it does passage to urge caution, telling us to be careful about the technology that passage 1 describes in a positive way, in favorable terms? Or is it that passage 2 considers practical applications that could arise from a theory discussed in passage 1? Now, here's the thing. 3 people got this question wrong. And here is the thing. D is, of course, wrong. Why? Because the summary of this answer is telling us that passage 1 is giving us a theory, and passage 2 is considering, explaining the practical applications. If we think about both passages, they both talk about theories, right? Passage number 1 is telling us why the extension is important and why it should happen. And passage 2 is telling us that doing this, we should be careful about it. But he doesn't give us any kind of, practical applications. There is no practical part in passage 2. Both are theoretical. And that's why D is wrong. You have to be careful about that. Of course, there will be one answer that's tricky, and that's why you should highlight keywords. And here, the most important key words are practical applications versus theory. So the answer is B. Of course, we already know that the authors of passage 2 think that this technology mentioned is a false promise. And that's why we can say that generally what this passage is discussing is that we should not believe this technology. We should not depend on this technology because it cannot solve our environmental problems. And the answer is B. Remember, guys, whenever you do a reading passage, whether it's a normal passage or a set of paired passages, okay? It doesn't matter what kind of passage you have, it's the same steps. You have to train yourself. You have to practice that. You have to read, highlight keywords, connect ideas together, and then you'll understand the whole passage. That's it. So read carefully, highlight keywords, connect the ideas using the keywords in order to get the relationship of ideas. Once you understand the key points and the relationship between them, automatically now you have a general understanding of the whole thing. When you go to the questions, again, highlight the keywords in the question itself. You should be able at least to eliminate 2 wrong answers. That's going to be very clear for you guys. If you cannot do that, then it means that there's something wrong with our comprehension. After we eliminate those 2 answers, yeah, one answer will be correct, the other one will be similar, will be tricky, and that's what you should be careful about. Okay, so here, for example, why D is wrong? Because it's telling us that passage 2 is practical, talking about the practical application, while passage 1 is theoretical. But again, they're both theoretical. Passage 2 is also providing a theory, not a practical application. And that's why D is wrong. So if you follow these steps I'm telling you about now, believe me, it's going to work like magic for you guys. But you have to train yourselves. You have to keep practicing and so on. That's why every time I'm giving you homework, even sometimes I give you 2 questions. I know it's only 2 questions and it doesn't really, it's not worth it to give it as an assignment or as homework. But it's just an opportunity for you guys to practice. So those who don't do their homework, they're affecting their practice, which means they're affecting their, study habits. And at the end, that will lead to a low score. That's something that nobody wants here, right? Unless you are doing that because you want a low score. Do we have anybody like that? I don't think so. All right. Now, as we said, after the general question, which is about the relationship, we have the reaction or the response question. And that's what's happening here. Question number 486. So they're telling us, it's like this. They're telling us, guys, do you remember the prospect thing that's mentioned in passage 1? What do you think the author of passage 2 would reply to this idea of prospect? Again, what do? We start with the mentioned part in the question. In this case, it's the prospect. And here we said what? We said that the prospect of de-extinction is profound news. That something as irreversible and final as extinction might be reversed is a stunning realization. And remember, de-extinction here is happening because of what? Thanks to, which means here, because of new developments in genetic technology. So now it's like this. They tell you, imagine we ask the author of passage 2 about this prospect. What do you think the author will say? Now, generally, of course, we know that this should be a negative answer, right? Because he doesn't agree with the idea of prospect. So will he approve of this prospect? Of course not. So immediately here, for example, A should be directly eliminated. Is it with resignation? No, here resignation, it doesn't mean to quit your job, of course, but it means to accept unwillingly. Like you accept the point, you know, but unwillingly. You don't really want to, but you just do it because maybe you don't have another choice or you don't want to argue and so on. Okay, let's look at the reason. Because the gradual extinction of many living species is inevitable, unavoidable. Like it's going to happen anyway, no matter what. Most, you know, living species will be extinct. Of course, this answer is also wrong because it's telling us instead of paying attention to the extinction, bringing animals back to life, you should focus on what? You should focus on protecting endangered animals. So if he thinks that those species will eventually be extinct, why would he tell us to pay attention to the endangered animals, right? That doesn't make sense. And then we have C and D. C with concern, again, with worry, because it implies an easy solution to a difficult problem. That's mentioned in the second passage. He said that it's a false promise that technology alone can solve our problems. So C works. D with disdain. Disdain simply means dislike or disagreement, because it shows that people have little understanding of the importance of genetic diversity. That's not mentioned anywhere. So D is wrong, and the best answer here is C.
Can you repeat how it gives us a solution to a difficult problem?
Here, what did he say about technology? He said here that a program to restore extinct species poses a risk of selling the public on a false promise that technology alone can solve our environmental woes. An implicit assurance that if a species goes away, we can snap our fingers. What does that mean? Like this, snap our fingers and bring it back. That suggests that the idea of extinction is easy to solve, but actually it's a difficult problem, okay? And that's why he's describing this project as a false promise, because the problem is serious, and here by saying technology can solve it, you know, this is not really what's going to happen. And now we're done with these two questions. Now for these two passages, we're not going to read them. Of course, I suppose that everybody read the two passages and answered the questions based on the reading. Okay, we're going to just try to save our time. Okay, so question number 21. As you can see, what are they asking us about? Can you tell me what type of question is this? Last time we talked about 5 different types of questions that come on both passages. Which one is this out of the 5 types?
The relationship between the two passages.
Mm-mm. Read the question. The crows in passage 1 and the ravens in passage 2 shared which trait? So what are we looking
Things
for?
between both passages.
Yeah, we're looking for a trait, you know, that's mentioned in both passages that the ravens and the crows both have. Okay, so I should choose an answer that applies to both passages. Now, if you look at, for example, A, the ravens and the crows, they modified their behavior in response to changes in their environment. Do you think that this happened in both passages? That they changed their behavior in response to changes in their environment and their surroundings?
No.
No.
Yes.
Yes. Which one is it? No or yes?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Now, if we check B, they formed a strong bond with the humans who were observing them. Did that happen in both passages? No, it happened only in passage 2. So that's not something that they shared. Okay, they manufactured useful tools for finding and accessing food. Again, that's happened only in passage 1. Yahya, are you with us?
Yes.
Okay. And D, they mimicked the actions they saw performed around them. Again, this is only about passage 2. So the only thing that happened in both passages is A, they modified their behavior in response to changes in their environment. Now, of course, the question will be, how is that? Very quickly, if we go to passage 1, after, you know, here the researchers, you know, let's say prepared the scene, because they said here, he and crow researcher Gavin Hunt had gotten wild crows used to finding meat tidbits in holes in a log. Once the birds were checking the log reliably, the researchers placed a spiky tropical pandanus plant. So this is the change in their environment, right? So what would happen here? A crow arrived, it hopped onto the pandanus plant, grabbed the spiked edge of one of the long strap-like leaves and began a series of ripping motions. Instead of just tearing away one long strip, the bird ripped and nipped in a sequence to create a slanting stair-step edge on a leaf segment with a narrow point and a wild pace. So here, this behavior that the bird is doing it's just because of what they provided it, right? It's because of the changes they made. And the same thing here, of course, if you remember, we read this part before. So the 4 young birds on our daily walks contacted all new objects preferentially. They picked them out at a rate of up to tens of thousands of times greater than background, etc. And here, the author was telling us that he was intentionally, you know, putting things in their path. Look, I tried to be teacher. I touched specific objects, and nothing that I touched remained untouched. So they are getting affected. Their behavior is getting affected by what the researchers are doing as well. So that's why the answer is A. Now, question number 22 is totally the opposite. We are looking for a difference now. And our focus here should be on, of course, passage 2. Because they're telling us that one difference between the experiments described in the 2 passages is that, unlike the researchers discussed in passage 1, what happened in passage 2 that's different? Okay? So we can start with D, for example. that the author of passage 2 tested the bird's tool using abilities. Was there any tool used in passage 2? No. That happened only in passage 1. It is a difference, but remember, our focus here is passage 2. Consciously manipulated the bird's surroundings. That's not a difference because it happened in both passages, 1 and 2. Intentionally made the birds aware of his presence, maybe. Presented the birds with a problem to solve, only in passage number 1. So the answer is B. Because in passage 2, the author intentionally made the birds aware of his presence. Okay, where is the answer here? Because look, in passage 1, look what the researchers did. They are telling us here, once the birds were checking the log reliably, the researchers placed a spiky tropical bandanus plant beside the log, and what did they do? The researchers hid behind a blind. And of course, here simply blind means curtain. So they made their presence not known to the birds because they would hide behind a curtain. So in passage 1, the researchers are hiding. They don't want to show themselves to the birds while they are solving the problem and using the spike, which is the tool to get, you know, the meat bites from the log. While here it's different, right? He said, I try to be teacher. So he was touching things in front of them to show them how to do things and how they would mimic or copy his actions. So that's why the answer here should be B. And then the last question. The last question is a kind of philosophical question. But let's see how we can answer such questions. Okay. Is the main conclusion presented by the author of passage 2? So I'm going to focus on the conclusion in passage 2. Consistent with, does it agree with Morgan's canon in passage 1? So that's what you should do, guys. You should go to these 2 parts and try to see if they agree or not. If I start with passage 1, what do I have? I have Morgan's canon. Muhammad, what is Morgan's canon? If we don't know what it is, can you tell us from passage 1 what they mean by Morgan's canon? What is that?
It's a principle.
And what does this principle say?
It's
والله نكيف يا محمد. لكن هاي اللي ما بينتبه خلاص انت حل الأسئلة وامورك تمام في العسل صح؟
لا.
طيب, it says that suggestions of a human-like mental processes behind an animal's behavior should be rejected if a simpler explanation will do, which means you see a certain behavior from an animal. Do not try to use or to, explain that behavior, saying that it's because of the same process that a human mental, processes work. That's not how it works. Because even, guys, if you read the title of passage 1, what does it say? A different kind of smart. So the author is saying that people are smart, human beings are smart, and animals are smart, but they have different kinds of smartness. It's not the same. So they are telling us in this Morgan's canon, in the principle like this, even if you see a similar behavior, acted or performed by animals, do not say it's because of the same mental processes that we have as humans. Yes, we are smart, and yes, animals are smart, but it's a different kind of smart. Okay, that's it. That's the principle. Now, since now we got this understanding of the principle, where should we go now? To the conclusion of passage 2, because these are the 2 parts mentioned in the question: the principle, the canon, and the conclusion. Where's the conclusion? The conclusion is this. The last sentence. These experiments showed. Immediately I know that this sentence will give me the result. It will give me, the conclusion. These experiments showed what? That ravens' curiosity ensures exposure to all or almost all items in the environment. So the question here is, guys, the behavior that we are, given from these birds is exposure to all or almost all items in the environment. What is the reason behind it? Who can tell me? According to this conclusion, it's happening because of what?
Their curiosity.
Good. Now, the next question is curiosity a human-like mental process? Are we as humans, do we base our interaction with the environment around us because we are curious beings or not?
Yes.
Good. So what's happening here is that the explanation of this behavior is curiosity, which is a human-like mental process. Does that agree with what the principle is saying? Yes or no?
Yes.
It agrees with it. Right? Why are you afraid to say something? I'm not gonna kill you. The question now is, do you think that the principle and this conclusion agree? Are they consistent with each other or not?
Yes.
The answer is no. The principle is telling you guys, do not attribute the animal's behavior to human-like mental processes. And now I asked you, is curiosity a human mental process? You said yes. What does the conclusion say? This exposure to all items in environment is because of curiosity. So what the author of passage 2 is saying, that they are doing this behavior because of curiosity, which is a human-like mental process. The principle is telling you, do not do that. Do not say that animals are doing this because they have the same mental process as humans. Okay? So are they consistent? No. Why? Because the conclusion that we've just mentioned implies that a human-like quality. What is that, a human-like quality? It's curiosity. It motivates what the raven's behavior. We've just said in the principle, again, that animals and people are different. So don't use the same explanation for their behavior. That's it. Don't use the same explanation for the animal's behavior and people's behavior. And then the author of passage 2 is telling us, you know what, this is happening because of curiosity. Okay, curiosity is something that people have. So it's doing the opposite of what the principle is suggesting. So the answer is D. No, they are not consistent. Why? Because the conclusion itself is giving an explanation that it's happening because of curiosity, which is a human-like quality. And the principle is telling us, do not do that. Do not use the same explanation for humans and for animals. And again, it's mentioned here. Look, we said suggestions of human-like mental processes behind an animal's behavior should be rejected. We don't accept those explanations or those suggestions. That's why the answer is D. Does that make sense now?
Yes.
Okay, great. We're gonna have now our break. I know it's early, but because we need to move to the passage and because discussions like this, I know that they tend to be a little bit boring because I'm the one who's talking all the time. But please, when we start discussing the answers on the set of paired passages, I'm gonna try to invite you to join the discussion as much as possible. So let's have our break now. And we're gonna come back after 15 minutes, inshallah. Okay, guys, we are back. All right. Let's see. So passage 1 is report on public instruction. Okay. Passage 2 is a vindication of the rights of women. So they are telling us here that the author of passage 1 is a French diplomat. Okay. And the report that we have in passage 1, it was a plan for national education. But the author of passage 2, Wollstonecraft, she was a British novelist and political writer, and she wrote Vindication in response to Talleyrand. So here is the thing: you have, first of all, the plan education for France, and we have a reply to that by the British novelist. Now, of course, when you read the two passages, you notice that passage 1 is saying that this is the main idea that we have here, that half the human race is excluded by the other half from any participation in government, that they are native by birth but foreign by law in the very land where they were born, and that they are property owners yet have no direct influence or representation. So all of these issues, of course, the one race that's excluded, he's talking about, of course, women here, okay? And that they are native by birth, but they are foreign by law. And that they have property, but they have no influence. He's saying that all of these are political phenomena, apparently impossible to explain on abstract principle. He says that we cannot just explain these in ideas, abstract principles. What do we need? We need here is that the purpose of all of these institutions must be what? He's saying it's all about the happiness of the greatest number. Okay? That's the basis of the argument. He's telling us, okay, let's forget about everything that we're talking here about, men and women. Let's focus on happiness of the greatest number of both genders. He says, everything that leads us farther from this purpose, everything that keeps us away from the happiness of both genders is an error. And everything that brings us closer is the truth, right? And that's why in the next paragraph, after he says that, or even in the next sentence, he says, if this exclusion, okay, from public employments decreed against women, of course, you were talking about the rights of women to participate in the government, to participate in politics, and so on. So before he started with his ideas about these rights, he said, look, I'm going to base my argument on this idea. Okay? Whatever we do is to bring happiness to the greatest number of both genders, men and women. So whatever brings us this happiness is the truth. And everything that is keeping us away from that happiness is wrong, right? That's why after that, he started with his ideas. What did he say? If the exclusion from public employments, even if we are doing this against women and we don't give them the right to participate in politics, in government, and so on, if this leads to a greater happiness for the two sexes, then this becomes a law that all societies have been compelled to acknowledge and sanction. And then, of course, we have then the other details. But this is the main idea. He says, what we are looking for is the happiness of both genders, men and women. And what we are trying to do is just to bring this happiness closer to everybody. So even if this exclusion of women from, practicing their rights to participate in government and politics, if this will bring happiness to the greatest number of men and women, then it should be a law. Okay? Now we start with the questions immediately. Question number 1, we have no problem. Everybody sent the answer, got the answer right. So the answer here is B. because we were talking about the shared happiness, which is the common happiness, which is the shared happiness between the two genders. Okay, so we have no problem with that. But we have a problem with the next question. 4 people out of 5 got this question wrong. Okay, let's see why is that and how we can get the right answer. First of all, guys, very quickly, who can tell me what type of question this is? What type of question?
Statement.
Sorry, again?
Statement.
No, it's the opposite. Yes, Jenna, exactly. It's what is the opposite of statement? Inference, right? It can be inferred that the authors of passage 1 believe that running a household and raising children. So first of all, look, again, we're not doing any kind of magic here, but it's going to work like magic for us because it will make everything easy. Number 1, decide the type of the question. We know it's an inference question. We know that you will not find the answer directly mentioned there. That's very important to keep in mind. That's why I always ask you before we even start answering, what type of question is this? It's inference. Okay, how do I get the inference? Number 2, keywords. What are we talking about? Running a household and raising children. These are my keywords. Okay, and so on. And then here this question is followed by evidence. So I can work with this evidence. Again, logically speaking, guys, logically speaking, the first question was about line 21. And we said, a trick that can help you is that the questions are in order. So if the question of 31 is in line 21, sorry, where should the next question be in the passage?
25 to 30.
Logically speaking, I have 2 options to work on, C and D. Now, of course, if I check both answers, and I'm sure they are both wrong, now you can go back to A and B, but save your time by using this trick. Now, does it work? I can tell you, it works 90% of the time. There are exceptions, of course, but very rarely these exceptions appear. 90% of the time, I can assure you that this trick works. Sometimes it doesn't, it depends, but most of the time it works. So to save our time, we're going to go to lines 25 and 30, and let's see if there's something mentioned about raising children and running a household, okay? So this is 25, and this is 30. And then the other one is from 30 to 35. Can you confirm, please?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, let's start with option C, 25 to 30. Is it not apparent that their delicate constitutions, of course, they refers to whom? Who are we talking about here? About women. Delicate, it means soft. And constitutions, we're talking about their bodies in general. Like he's saying that women have soft bodies. They're not harsh like men. So isn't it apparent that these soft bodies, their peaceful inclinations, attitudes, characters, and the many duties of motherhood set them apart from strenuous habits and onerous duties? So here we have strenuous habits. Did you look it up? What does the word strenuous mean? Any idea?
Needs a lot of energy.
Exactly. Exactly. So again, strenuous simply means, hard, arduous, you can say. So let's just say hard. Okay, it requires a lot of work. And what about the other word, which is onerous?
Involving a great deal of effort.
Onerous. Yes, it means tiring, right? And focus. This is an inference question, which means you're not going to get the answer directly stated in the passage. So what he's saying here, that he's saying, guys, don't you notice that because women have, soft bodies and peaceful attitudes and characters and duties of motherhood, don't you notice that all of these things keep them away from hard work and tiring tasks? and summon them, call them, bring them closer to what? To gentle occupations and the cares of the home. So what can we infer from this? We can infer that because of these specific characteristics that women have, they don't usually do hard work, something physical, like men, right? They have the duties of the motherhood, of course, and they have the cares of the home, of course. They are working, but they're not like men. Like men, they work in construction, they work, in sports, wrestling, and so on. And this is for men. Yes, exactly. So that's what we can get from these lines. And then if we read just 30 and 35 to check D as well, and is it not evident that the great conserving principle of societies, which makes the division of powers a source of harmony, which makes the division of power, has been expressed and revealed by nature itself, when it divided the functions of the two sexes in so obviously distinct a manner. So here in these lines, he's saying that these divisions between men and women that are made by society, they're just, a source of harmony. All right. First of all, the motherhood and the duties and the cares of the home, where is that mentioned? Actually, it was mentioned in the lines 25 to 30. First of all, we have motherhood. And the other thing that was mentioned was, if you remember, the cares of the home. Now, what are the cares of the home and what is motherhood? Isn't it about raising children and running a household? Yes. Can I use C as my evidence? Yes. Does it logically fit the sequence? Yes, because question number 1 was about 20 in line 21, and this is 25. It's following the sequence. All I need to know now, which idea matches what we have. But remember, it's an inference. The main idea that's mentioned in the passage is that those characteristics of women keep them away from hard jobs. That's it. Okay, what can we understand? Can we say that running a household and raising children are rewarding for men as well as for women? Can we say that? Do we have that in the lines 25 to 30?
Oh.
Wrong. Yield, which means, get less value for society than do the roles performed by men. Did he say that these roles are not really valuable for society?
No.
No. Entail, which means contain. Very few activities that are difficult or unpleasant.
Yes.
Yes, so the answer is C. And D, require skills similar to those needed to run a country or a business? Of course not. But now we're going to ask ourselves, where do we get activities difficult and unpleasant? Difficult is just another word for strenuous. And unpleasant is just another word for onerous. And remember, they will always use what? Synonyms, guys. They will not give you the same words. And since they told us that these, gentle characteristics of women keep them away from those difficult and unpleasant activities, that's exactly what we have here. We can understand that running a household and raising children doesn't really, or they both don't really include difficult or unpleasant activities. Okay? So that's an inference question, and this is our evidence. Okay, now let's move for the next.
Something?
Yep.
Didn't the author say that this holds the greatest number of happiness?
What is it? Which lines? Give me the lines.
15.
Okay, what does it say? If the exclusion from public employments decreed against women leads to a greater sum of mutual happiness for the two sexes, then this becomes a law, right?
Yes.
Perfect. The question here is, where in these lines can we find the issue of running a household? Where in these lines can we find the issue of raising children?
Yeah, it doesn't have to do with it.
وين الkeywords يا تسنيم? Where are the keywords? You're answering the question based on the keywords you have. Okay, now, did the author say this, what you mentioned now? Yes, he said that. And doesn't it make sense? Yes, it does make sense. But Is the question about the exclusion of women from public employment? No. The question itself is about the two ideas of running a household and raising children. And that's why I tell you, take these keywords and find them in the passage. And again, you'll not find them as they are in the question. You will find synonyms for them. Sometimes even not synonyms, they will express the idea in a different way. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
If you just keep that in mind, it will always, help you avoid making mistakes. Just take those keywords from the question. And when you go back and forth between the question and the passage, make sure that you are looking for these specific keywords, nothing else. Okay?
Okay.
Question 34, guys, we have no problem with. Again, everybody who sent me their answers got the right answer, which is D. Of course, in the author of passage 2 says that if you really want society to progress, then women should receive an education comparable to that of men. Women should have the same education that men are having. So the answer is D. Now we move to the next question, which is about vocabulary in context. Question number 35. Okay, reason. Tasneem, let's go through the steps one by one. I know that I'm asked about the word reason, which is in line 50. What do you do first?
The part of speech.
Good. What part of speech is it?
Adjective, right?
Unless
Noun.
freedom strengthen
No.
her reason.
Noun.
It's a noun. Good. Is it work in the sentence as a subject or as an object?
Object of the. No, wait.
Good. So the object is reason. What is the verb strengthen? Who's or what is doing that action, strengthening the reason? It's freedom. Okay, good. So now, unless freedom strengthen her reason. Okay, now here's the connection. If we use freedom to strengthen our reason, and I don't know what reason means here, okay? Till she comprehend her duty. What does it mean, comprehend?
Understand.
Perfect. So he's telling us that if you want women to understand their duty in society, you should give them freedom to strengthen their reason. That's it. That's it. What is reason? We should strengthen their motive to understand their duties, sanity, intellect, or explanation. Give me two options that are completely wrong, Tasneem.
D.
D, okay. I agree here. And what is the second one?
B.
B, yes, exactly. Those are the two answers that should be eliminated. Now, so if I'm telling you that we should strengthen women's reason, women's what? Women's motive or women's intellect to understand their duty. What would you say reason means here?
Motive.
No.
Intellect.
It's intellect. Okay. So why is it intellect, not motive? Doesn't motive work? Yes. Remember, I told you one of the wrong answers is that if you take the word and you put it there, it will make sense. But remember, you are trying to use this word to match the same meaning we have in reason. So how do I know what reason means? But the question itself is about the meaning of reason. How do I know that? We read comprehend her duty, understand. So they didn't talk about motivation. They talked about understanding. And to understand, what should we strengthen? Our intellect, our, thinking skills. And that's what intellect is. So step by step, you will be able to answer the question. And remember, when we did the vocabulary in question part, I told you guys, sometimes if you take a word and you put it in a sentence, wow, it works. Okay, it should work. But what's more important, I'm not saying that that's not important. Of course, it's important for the word you choose to work in the sentence, but the more important thing, does it match the meaning? If not, then even if it works logically in the sentence, it's not enough. It should work semantically, which means meaning-wise. Right, thank you, Tasneem. Now, again, here we have what? For 36 and 37, just a second, let me look here. All right. For 36 and 37, what we are saying is that we have an evidence question, and it's about what? Claims. So this time, the question is what type?
Statement.
Good, it's a statement question. So now Okay, good. The detail is mentioned directly there. Where's my evidence? Remember, what do we do? Who's going to tell me? What do we do for the evidence?
See the last line we
Okay,
used.
which line was it in?
50.
50. Does it make sense to start with A and B?
No.
No, because they're both before line 50. Again, of course, sometimes if you read C and D and neither works, of course, you need to go back to A and B. But what you do is to save time, is to skip those. You only go back to them if none of the other options works. Okay, so we're going to start with 65, 66, and then we're going to move to 72 to 78. Keep that in mind. Okay, so we have 65, 66. But oh, I forgot something very important. What are the keywords, right? The author claims that freedoms given by society, given or granted by society's leaders have done what? What was the effect of those freedoms that were given by society leaders? Just like that, these are the keywords. That's what I'm looking for. This is my focus. This is everything I'm working for. So we already said we're not going to check A and B because they are not in the sequence that we have. So we're going to start with 65. If so, on what does your constitution rest? Does that tell us anything? Not really. So now we have 72 to 78, which is here. Let's see. Consider I address you as a legislator, whether when men contend for their freedom and to be allowed to judge for themselves, respecting their own happiness, it be not inconsistent and unjust to subjugate women, even though you firmly believe that you are acting in the manner best calculated to promote their happiness. Are these the lines that we have in option D? Yes or no? Guys.
Yes.
والله لنكيفنا ثانيين اصحوا. Yes, 72 to 78. All right. Let's see. Again, consider whether when men contend for their freedom. Okay, so here we have the first keyword, which is freedom. And to be allowed to judge for themselves, respecting their own happiness. Okay, who are we talking about here? Men. And men, we know that they are the ones who are, running the government. So they are the leaders. Remember, you will not find the words themselves as they are. But here, men, it's referring to those society leaders, because who are the leaders in society at that time when they are discussing this topic? It's men, right? So she's telling the author of passage 1 that when you do this, when you give yourself freedom, when you are allowed to judge for yourself, respecting your own happiness, isn't it inconsistent and unfair, unjust to subjugate women, even though you firmly believe that you are acting in the manner best calculated to promote their happiness? Who made man the exclusive judge if women partake with him the gift of reason? So what that, if we're going to summarize these lines, we're going to say that men are given freedom and they are happy with that. But by doing this, it's unfair to women because they are subjugated and they don't have their freedom in order to do what? To do the same, to have happiness. Despite the fact, she's telling him that you are claiming that you are looking for our happiness as well, but that's not happening because men have a freedom, women don't. So first of all, I'm sure that now my evidence is in D, okay, for sure. I just need an option that matches what we have here. Of course, do you think that the answer should be generally positive or negative about those freedoms granted by society's leaders?
Negative.
Negative, right? Because it was only given to men and not to women, right? So the first option that I can eliminate is D, because ensured equality for all people. No, she said unjust in those lines. So how can I say that the answer is equality while she is saying it's unfair? Caused arguments about the nature of happiness. She's telling that when you gave men freedom, now we have arguments about what happiness really is. No, that's not the right answer. She said that you are making yourselves happy but you are making women miserable, despite claiming that you are trying to make them happy. B, resulted in a general reduction in individual virtue. Simply that's not mentioned. The only option that works here is A. And even if we read it, privileged, gave privilege, gave preference to one gender over the other. Who's that one gender? It's men. Who's the other? It's women. And that makes sense. Okay, so those freedoms were only given to men and not to women, and it's unfair. So these freedoms privileged one gender, which is man, over the other, which is woman. Does that make sense?
Yes, but what do they mean in B?
Result, okay, they are telling us that when you gave men freedom, not women, the result was a general reduction. So there was decrease in individual virtue. Virtue, what does it mean? Morals, good manners. That people are getting a little bit out of morals, but that's not mentioned there. She just said that you have your freedoms as men and women don't, and that's why they're not happy, and it's unfair for women.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Okay. In lines 61 to 65, the author of passage 2 refers to a statement made in passage 1 in order to 1. Okay, let's see. So we have line 61 to 65. Let's see what that reference is. That to see one half of the human race excluded by the other from all participation of government was a political phenomenon. According to abstract principles, it was impossible to explain. This is, of course, what the first or the author of the first passage mentioned, right? It's at the beginning here. That half the human race is excluded by the other half from any participation in government, that they are native by birth but foreign by law in the very land where they were born, and that they are property owners yet have no direct influence or representation. He said about all of these that these are just political phenomena, impossible to explain on abstract principle. And now the author of passage 2, Mary, she mentioned the same thing. She was telling him like this: didn't you say that here in these lines? No, but the question here is a function question. We need to understand, why did she mention that part from passage 1? What's the point? Why is she doing that? Okay, of course, what do? We need to read before and after. We start from the beginning of the paragraph as usual with function questions to get what? To get context. Consider, sir, dispassionately these observations, for a glimpse of this truth seemed to open before you when you observed. And then she mentioned what he said, and now she's telling him, if so, if what you're saying is true, on what does your constitution rest? If the abstract rights of man will bear discussion and explanation, those referring to rights, those of women, rights of women, by a parity of reasoning, will not shrink from the same test. Like she's telling him, okay, why only rights of women cannot be explained and discussed? Why the rights of man can? Because here, look, she's telling him, if the abstract rights of man will stand discussion and explanation, so the rights of women should be able to do the same thing. They will not shrink from the same test. Though a different opinion prevails in this country, built on the very arguments which you use to justify the oppression of women, which is what? Prescription. So she's telling him, you are saying that explaining the rights of women and discussing them on an abstract background is impossible. But when you talk about the rights of man, you do explain them and you do discuss them, in an abstract way. So why would women's rights not do the same? Go to this through the same test, right? Of course, she's arguing here, as you can see. And she's telling him that what you're saying is not correct, because you are saying that it works for women, it works for men and it doesn't work for women. That's basically what she's saying in these lines. So what is the function here? Call into question the qualifications of the authors regarding gender issues, dispute the assertion made about women in the first sentence of passage 1, develop her argument by highlighting what she sees as flawed reasoning, or validate the concluding declarations made by the authors of passage 1 about gender roles. Of course, here, as you can see, guys, the first answer you should eliminate is D, validate, which means confirm, approve the conclusions made by the authors of passage 1 on gender roles. Of course, they don't agree. So how would they validate these concluding declarations? Okay. And then the other option that you should eliminate is A, call into question, of course, call into doubt. She's trying to doubt his qualifications on gender issues? Not really. The answer should either be B or C. Let me hear from you guys. What do you think it is?
C.
Okay, so the answer is C. She's trying to develop her argument by highlighting what she sees as flawed reasoning. She's telling him the way you are, of course, you're reasoning again. It means thinking. She's telling him the way you are thinking is wrong. It's flawed. Because according to you, it applies to men, but it doesn't apply to women. And why is that? Okay, guys. So remember, most of the time when you argue with somebody, if you really want to make your argument stronger, you need to use his or her own words against them. That's the best way anybody in the world makes his or her argument strong. Don't just list your ideas because they will oppose your ideas. Don't just give points because they will challenge these points. If you really want to have a strong argument when you are having a debate, then the best weapon is the other person's words, and then use those words against them. That's what's happening here, right? Okay, guys. Now, in the relationship, actually, we have no problem. Almost all of us, not all of us, but almost all of us, 4 out of 5 people got the answer right, which is A. Because it's clear that passage 2 strongly challenges the point of view in passage 1. That's something really clear for us, right? And now we have only 2 questions left, 40 and 41.
Can I ask something?
Yep.
What do they mean in B with drawing alternative conclusions? Isn't alternative opposite?
No, alternative, it means another option. So when they say passage 2 draws alternative conclusions from the evidence presented in passage 1, it means passage 1 and passage 2, they have the same evidence. Okay? Passage 1 uses this evidence to come up with conclusions, and passage 2 is using the same evidence for different conclusions. That's not what's happening here, right?
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Now, the funny thing about 40 and 41, I know that they are, different questions, but those, like, everybody who got 40 right got 41 wrong. And everybody who got 41 right got 40 wrong. Or got both 40 and 41 wrong. Nobody got 40 and 41 right. So it's fine. Let's see what we can do with these questions. And that's why I'm just trying to clarify why we should discuss these 2 questions. Okay. So the authors of both passages would most likely agree with which of the following statements about women in the 18th century. Now we know that the authors in general, they have different points of view. The author of passage 1 says that, okay, guys, look, leave women and the way they are created, the way they are here in nature, to do simple and not really tiring and difficult tasks, okay? And leave the hard work and the government and the politics to man. While the author of passage 2, she said, first of all, women should have the same education that men are having, because this education will help women do her duties in raising children and make sure that the society becomes very good to everybody. And of course, this education will lead to other positions like working in the government, politics, and so on. But despite the fact that they have different points of view in general, they have one thing that they agree about related to women. Okay, so first of all, do they both say that, you know, women's natural preferences were the same as those of men? Of course not. That's clear to be wrong, because passage 1 is saying that natural preferences for men are different from those of women, for sure. They needed a good education to be successful in society. Here's the thing. Remember the question we did about ravens and crows? We said we need a similarity, and it should be mentioned in both. For example, in number 1, in A, that's typically wrong because it's mentioned in passage 1, but not the same. He said that, of course, nature made women choose specific tasks and men choose other tasks. So we know that this is mentioned in passage 1. They needed a good education. This is only mentioned in 2, right? It doesn't mean that the author of passage 1 agree. Remember, the key word here, agree, which means the answer you choose, it's already mentioned in both passages 1 and 2, and both authors agree on. If you read B, they needed good education. Yes, this is mentioned, but where? Only in passage 2. So I cannot say that both authors agree on this, right? C, women, they were just as happy in life as men were. Who's saying that? In both passages, or in just passage 1, or just in passage 2?
Neither.
No, come on, man. In passage 1, it's mentioned. He said, everything we're doing is just to make everybody happy. And that's why, according to the author of passage 1, he says that everybody's happy. Women are just as happy in life as men. But of course, in passage 2, the author says, no, they're not. It's unfair to them. They're not happy. They don't have freedom. They don't have education. So the answer is D. They generally enjoyed fewer rights than men did. Now that's clearly mentioned in passage 2, right? She says that they don't have all the rights that men are having. Do we agree on that? So it's already mentioned in passage 2. What about passage 1? Look, it's in the beginning. He admits that women are excluded from this participation, which is considered to be rights, right? So it's both. It's mentioned in both passage 1, the exclusion part, and in 2, when we read about the freedoms and how it's unjust for women. Now, yes, this is something mentioned in both passages, and both authors would agree on this point. Yeah, I mean, if they have, for example, if man has education and woman doesn't have education, they don't have the same rights in just education parts. But in general, women have rights, but they are not the same as the rights of men, and they are not as many. That's why we're saying fewer rights. Because here in this part, where is it? Okay. I mean, in general, we get the point. Okay. Now, the last question, 41. How would the authors of passage 1 most likely respond to the points made in the final paragraph of passage 2? That's a response question. What do we start with? What's mentioned in the question, which is the final paragraph of passage 2. So this is passage 2. Now we're going to read it to understand what it's about, highlighting the keywords, and then we're going to see passage 1. In this style, argue tyrants of every denomination, from the weak king to the weak father of family. So, of course, here she's talking about men. They're all eager to crush reason. They all want just to, you know, do whatever they want and ignore logic, ignore, you know, thinking. Yet always they assert that they usurp its throne only to be useful. They say that they go on. Of course, usurp, it means to ascend, go on. They say that they use reason to be useful. But of course, they are at the same time, they are crushing reason. Do you not act a similar part when you force all women by denying them civil and political rights to remain immersed in their families, groping in the dark? That's the final paragraph of passage 2. Okay, where should we go now? They're telling us, how would the authors of passage 1 most likely respond to these points made in the final paragraph? Now, of course, that depends on your generous understanding. Now, you want to go back to passage 1, of course you can go back, but if you can do it just based on your understanding, that's much better. Because here, for example, we don't have an evidence question. So let's explore the options. If we can answer, we can answer. If we can't, we can go back to the passage, okay? So women are not naturally suited for the exercise of civil and political rights. Like when she's telling him that you are not giving women the political rights, the civil rights. Do you think that the author would say that women are not naturally suited for the exercise of civil and political rights? Yes, it's mentioned there. I'm going to show you where. Men and women possess similar degrees of reasoning ability? No. Women do not need to remain confined to their traditional family duties. That's the opposite. Like C should be clearly wrong, because passage 1 is telling us that women should stay or should remain doing their traditional family duties. The principles of natural law should not be invoked when considering gender rules. Again, D is completely wrong, because what's the basis of the authors of passage 1 argument? It's that women have specific natural features that keep them in their motherhood. And number 2, because of that, they should keep doing those traditional family roles or tasks or duties. So C and D are completely wrong. Like you should not even consider them, if you understand, of course, the basis of the argument of the authors of passage 1. But for example, now we said it's A. Women are not naturally suited for the exercise of civil and political rights. Where did we get that response? It's the same one that, guys, we used to answer one of the questions before. Okay, remember, natural, right? So what did he say? He said, and, sorry, it's here. Yep. Let's start from the beginning. It seems to us incontestable that our common happiness above all that of women requires that they never aspire to the exercise of political rights and functions. So he says, if we really to get everybody's happiness, and especially when he says above all, which means the most important thing is that of women. And of course, we know that that refers to happiness. So he's saying, if we want everybody to be happy, especially women, okay, then we should require that they never aspire, never want, never desire to exercise political rights and functions. Of course, it's then followed by the explanation. Why is that? Here we must seek their interests in the wishes of nature. And this is our answer. And of course, with the other lines, but I don't want to read them again because we already read the other lines. So here they are telling us that women are not naturally suited for the exercise of civil and political rights. And the lines I've just shown you guys, they contain the exact same point. He said, women should never aspire to the exercise of civil and political rights. We should seek their interests, you know, in nature or by nature. And that's what's written here. They're not naturally suited for the exercise of civil and political rights. Does that make sense now?
Yes.
Good. Now, next session, inshallah, next week on Tuesday, it's going to be the last session where we have input sessions, because we still have only the general questions, which is What is the main idea of the passage? What is the main purpose of the passage? What is the general point of view of the passage? What is the general structure of the passage, and so on. But all the specific skills, all the different types of specific questions, we covered them, and you should keep that in mind, okay, guys? So again, they are vocabulary, statements, inferences, evidence, function, paired passages, and the graphs. In addition to these 7 skills, we have the general skills. Just understanding the main idea of the passage, the main purpose of the passage, the general point of view in the passage, the argument of the passage. These are general questions based just on our general understanding. That's why I started with everything specific, and then we're going to move to the big picture, which is about general questions. Okay? So inshallah, that means that next week we're going to be done with the reading section. So on Tuesday, we are going to discuss very quickly, just because, I mean, there's nothing really specific technique that I'll tell you about, right? It's based on your general understanding of the passage. If you really understand what the passage is about, what the topic is the author mentioning this topic in a positive or in a negative way, then you're going to be able to answer those questions, okay? But of course, I'm going to mention all these different types of questions, how each question is different from the other, and of course, we're going to practice on general questions. And then on Thursday, I'm going to just give you passages on Tuesday, you do them, and we discuss them on Thursday, okay? And then starting from the week after, all is going to happen is we do a practice test, okay? You send me your answers. On Tuesday, we just discuss the reading section. And on Thursday, we discuss the writing section, which means next week, inshallah, we are officially done with the course. When it comes to sessions, when it comes to skills, question types, etc., we covered everything. But of course, we're going to continue with you guys to just give you a practice test, discuss it, practice test, discuss it, and so on. Does that make sense? Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay. So, Jenna, if you just watch the video later, because now I myself forgot what that was about. So please, just when you are free, just go and see this session a few days later, inshallah. Okay. So are we going to have homework? Of course, I'm going to give you homework. So please do the homework and send me your answers. Okay, guys. Any questions? Rodwa, why do you seem angry? Are you fine? Okay. Tasneem here. I know that. Okay, guys. Thank you so much, and see you next week, inshallah. Have a nice weekend. Goodbye.